I gotta pick a window. Let's make sure I pick the right one. Here we go. All right. So all I'm going to start with here is the MPSGE repo. And I'm doing this because I might be able to share a link in chat, but just in case I'm not, make sure people can get to where I'm going to go, although it will eventually just be the standard. So I'm going to do, this is the MPSGE repo. I'm just going to open the docs, the dev docs. And what I've done is I've made a pull request with documentation. But in order to view this documentation, you got to change the URL. It's previews and it's PR240. I always forget which PR it is, but it says it right there. And I'll dump this link in the chat just in case you want to follow along and it actually works. There we go. Okay, so this is the MPSGE documentation. The new section is overview, because what I want to try to do, I think one of the big problems with MPSGE is that it's kind of a big old black box. And that makes people uncomfortable. Like, people want to see the equations, they want to mess with the equations, they want to muck with the equations, and then here they don't get that immediately. So that's my goal. Yeah. The first page just sort of explains essentially what MPSGE is it just sits on top of jump. So it sits on top of Julia jump. It builds, like, any variables that are created here are mirrored down in jump. Jump handles all of the algebra, building expressions, passing that off to solvers. So really, MPSGE is just, it builds the correct variables and the correct equations and gives it to jump, and jump does all the hard work, which is great because then I don't have to do as much hard work. Just all the hard work of getting the equations right. Okay. So this is going to be a little bit of a dive into how this stuff works with a little bit of like how to use it more effectively, I guess. So MPSGE has variables. Variables can be scalar or they can be indexed. The only real difference is that an index variable creates a bunch of scalar variables. So an index variable you can just think of as a container with the elements being scalar variables. And when it creates a variable, like when MPSGE creates a scalar variable, it just builds the corresponding variable in jump with the same exact name. So I'll talk about that in a second, like how that looks. Types of variables, parameters, sectors, commodities, consumers, auxiliary variables, no surprises. If you want the doc strings of the macros, I popped those there. The doc strings are pretty good. I focused on doc strings instead of raw documentation. I still need to put doc strings on the actual types. Working on it. All right. Any variable has a bunch of keyword arguments. You can give it a description. So I'm looking right here. A description, a start value, a lower bound, or an upper bound automatically in the constructor for the macro. So for example, I do that nowhere. Oh, that's smart. Updates. Now let me look at sector. So for example, with sector, I can put description equals description, and I can do that for any of these keyword arguments. So I could do that for the start, the lower bound, or the upper bound. And they all have defaults, of course. There it is. This is great. There's opportunity here. If you ever want to add more, I've made it fairly extensible to be able to do that. In fact, I can look in the code, right? I can show you exactly where it happens. Source, macros, MPSGE variable. There you can see what they are, and you can see the defaults. The auxiliary variables have a different start. They start at 0. But if you ever wanted to update this, you would need to update these because the macro is going to check this list to make sure that it's actually available, one of the actual keyword arguments. And then it's going to pass it to here. So you'd also need to update this because these are the actual keyword arguments. I do plan to refactor this code quite a bit. because it's kind of, I don't want to call it spaghetti, but it's a little close. I've refactored the production code and how like all the macros, and those are pretty good, but the struct stuff is a little bit less good. So that's one of my goals. But yeah, keyword arguments, very easy to do. Scalar variables and index variables are very similar. The only real difference is that between like a parameter and the other ones is that a parameter stores its value. Yeah, Joe, go for it. Oh, I think you're muted. Yep.
Sorry. So when you're saying you want to restructure, for example, doing that struct situation, you just want to make it so you don't have to bounce between multiple files if you're gonna update it. If one was going to update it, so they don't have to go to multiple files to have to then change these arguments to make sure it applies throughout these multiple scripts.
Potentially, yes. And I might actually just move like these keywords to this file. But the bigger problem with this file is that it starts here and it goes all the way down. It has every single struct in it. I'd rather have that be broken out so that like variables are in one and parameters, production, and also a lot of the names need to be updated. I think I use cost function like 4 different times in 4 different ways, which is non-ideal.
Yeah.
Of course. Yeah, so I get confused about which one is which. The good news is that I've gotten the Rube Goldberg machine balanced pretty well. So it's fairly reliable, but I'd like to make it more steady and secure. I should tell you what the actual goal is. So one of the reasons that I want to restructure this package, we only allow CES functions at the moment. And Cobb Douglas, that's CES though. We only really allow CES. That's the default, that's the standard. Is that the only one? No. Tom is big on Logit. He got really interested on that in my last year or his last year. And that should be, if I structure this correctly, that should be really trivial to implement. Because all it is it's a different functional form of the cost function. And we build cost functions. So I should just be able to have a flag that tells it if you want to use Logit or CES. It shouldn't be that bad. And I could also probably do it per production function, but actually I should be able to do that. I don't know if that's useful, but I should be able to. Okay. Like I said, index variables are just containers. When you extract something from a container, it becomes a scalar, right? Yeah, Drew, go for it.
I think I just wanted to quickly comment on your idea for the Logit versus CES. It sounds pretty cool. It would provide a really nice way of doing sensitivity analysis that's typically not done. I haven't used the Logit functions in CG models before. You don't have to define any substitution elasticity, right? Like it's sort of like baked in there, or are there other parameters that you have to define when you write down the functions in MPSGE to make it work?
I don't think so. Tom had examples of doing this. Like he didn't have it in MPSGE, but he had examples showing the Logit and a CES functional form.
Yeah, I remember that. And you could calibrate it such that like locally around the calibration point, it was like identical, but then like further away, it kind of diverged. My memory sucks, so I couldn't remember how it works. But, all right, thanks.
Yeah. Essentially at a point, the derivatives are the same. So they're locally similar, but globally they sort of diverge. And I think he used it on his porters and mules problem. If you're familiar with Tom, you know that one. And there weren't huge differences, which really disappointed him. So he started doing bigger models to see the differences. One thing I should point out, when I define a sector, I try to almost always put these index variables, even if I'm not using it later, like I equals the set I. The reason for that is this is what's stored in MPSGE. So when like you display a parameter, or when you display like a variable of some sort, that's the little variable that you see. Why don't we use the capital? Essentially this, right? That can be anything. but this you're fairly assured is something that's useful. And you can call it what you want. So I've been calling it good and sector. So that way later I'm like, oh, that's a sector. Instead of R and RR and RRR and S and Q, but they all mean the same thing. These are not well documented at the moment, which is really disappointing because they're kind of how you interact with variables. But they're extensions of jump functions. So you can find the value, you can fix, you can unfix. You can do all the jump things you expect, upper bounds, lower bounds. If you want to see all the variables, those need doc strings. That's on my list. I have a list, doc string, and that is technically not on there, but it's here. These I would like to just be links so you can just click them and see what you put in, but they're pretty straightforward. They're exactly like jump, except for fix, but I'll document that at some point. Okay. Production blocks. I put a lot of work into production blocks, and I've tried to make them be very efficient. And they're much better now than they were when it started. If you're unfamiliar with this, I'm going to bet most people here, a lot of this stuff you're familiar with. Whoa, okay, my mouse hovered over Drew and it pulled up every piece of information that I have about him. That was weird. Sorry. Hold on, let's see if I can do that again. Yep, he's in a call. Check that out. High-level macro version, a production block just defines the inputs and outputs into a sector. That's it. A net put is just an input or an output. You can see the doc strings. This is the tax-adjusted price. I've used minus plus instead of plus minus because the minus, oh, I always forget. Minus is for outputs, plus is for inputs. So it's 1 plus the tax rate for an input, 1 minus the tax rate for an output. I always forget that. I know there's a logical way to figure it out. My brain just flips it. I don't know. So this is the tax-adjusted price with the reference price included. So the reference price can be used if you have a non-unital initial price, like if you want to incorporate taxes into that. Basically, then you can cancel this portion out. However, if you do have a non-unital reference price, you have to adjust the quantity as well. So the quantity gets adjusted like this, it's just multiplication, so that the total value is this, P bar times Q bar. And I think this is really important because it tells you what type of prices or what type of values go into MPSGE, like basic price, purchaser price, producer price. I have those written down somewhere. My brain has deleted what they mean. Basic, I believe it's basic price is the low. Oh no, producer price is the lowest, then basic, then purchaser. But it's just important you know which is which. And I'll document that more when I look at my notes, because I just forget. So then we have nests. I think most people here understand nests just for completeness. You need 2 top-level nests, one for output, one for input. And those don't have any children. Those don't have any parents. They, of course, have children. They're just root nodes. They go in and out. If you want a child nest, you do child, double arrow, parent nest, and then equals the elasticity. You can make these be nested. So like this is an example of a nest, or not nest, indexed. Already they're nests. It can't be, yeah, indexed. Big difference between Julia and GAMS. I believe GAMS only allow a single indexed nests. Because Tom said, what else would you need? And I said, well, the code to do it for multiple is the exact same as doing it for one. So you can have arbitrarily indexed nests. So if you wanted like a double index nest for some reason, like you wanted to, like each state and good had different elasticities, different technologies, you can do that pretty easily. I don't know if there's a use for it, but it exists. But yeah, it definitely supports it and it works pretty well. Here is something I'm going to bet nobody knows what I'm going to talk about. Nobody knows like this at the MPSGE level. A node, MPSGE builds a tree. A node is just a vertex in that tree. It's a non-leaf vertex in that tree. So it stores it knows what nest it belongs to, and it knows the cost function. So the cost functions are built recursively. So you start with the leaves, you just sort of build your way up. I have an example down here that is probably needs work because I typed it up quickly this morning. Builds it up recursively using CES, whatever it is, based on elasticities. They have signs. This cost function virtual, this is an abstraction. So in the actual model, we don't, how do I want to say this? Cost functions can be big. Think about the household model. Drew will probably know this. The household model has a couple nests, or has a couple of them that are huge, a couple cost functions that are huge because they index over all the goods, the states, and the households. So the production function gets really big. And I think one of them has like 1,000 something terms, 4,000 terms. Like it just gets huge. And the problem is those cost functions are used a lot. Every compensated demand has that cost function in it. And those get used in taxes and in market demand or market clearance and zero profit. And if you're passing around a huge object to multiple times, it's going to slow down your code. So what I do is I build a cost function. It gets assigned to a variable as a sub-expression. So instead of using the whole expression, I just use that one variable. So that way we don't have to repeat calculations. We don't have to move that stuff around. And I think this is a huge advantage over GAMS. It's the reason I believe, I don't actually know this, I believe it's the reason that GAMS takes like 15 minutes to build and solve the household model, and Julia takes like 2. I think that's it. There can be some numerical weirdness here, I've learned. Yeah, Joe's like, wow, great. There can be some numerical weirdness. Because you have more sort of boundary conditions, path can get kind of weird. So I'm working to make that be a little bit better. I had one example that I was working on where the elasticity started at 1 and went to 15. GAMS did it great. Julia had to sort of incremental it up. It worked, but it worked and it didn't take that long as a small model, but it's something I need to work on. I'd like to have that be nice. Oh, I've also tried to put notes to myself here so that I know what to do later. Okay, cost functions. Okay, I'll be honest, I did not draw this picture. I started typing this and AI drew a picture that was similar to this. And I was like, that's really great. I modified it, but yeah, I didn't think to do that. That's pretty nice. This is just an example building a cost function. It's just sort of recursive down. I don't think it's perfect right now. I don't like it is, so I'll verify this. And I'd like to add more detail. But yeah, this is exactly what it is. Starts the leaves, and it's just like the cost function of what's below it, added up in a CES, and then those recurse and expand. So if you had multiple levels, it would be cost functions of these, and then those cost functions would have cost functions, and those cost functions would have cost functions. Just recursion. Okay. And I think Eli is going to pop in about 8 minutes, and then we're going to get into a fight, and it's going to be fun. Because the next section is demand blocks. I don't like demand blocks. And I'm going to tell you why, and then I'm going to solicit opinions from you guys. So in a demand block, basically the idea is that you can have multiple final demands, right? And those final demands can be part of production. Those can have some sort of elasticity and nesting structure with them. Currently, I don't have that implemented at all. The only thing that I have is you can have a single elasticity define it. I think in GAMS you can put multiple elasticities and like define the whole production structure. That's a lot of duplicated code, and I don't like. I think I could do it, but it's a lot of code. I have a proposal to change it to something like this, where instead of having a bunch of final demands, like the consumer is demanding all of these commodities. Instead, the consumer demands a single quantity or a single commodity, not quantity. But it requires additional code because you have to define a sector, a commodity, and then a production block that defines this. The advantage is that then you get all of the power of the production block for that commodity. So it's much easier to extract compensated demands. It's much easier to extract like prices and stuff like that. The downside is that you have to type a lot more. It's going to make your models a little bit longer. The other plus side is that then you don't have to worry about this quantity adding up to these because it should already do that. And of course, that gets harder with taxes anyway. You could also put taxes here, but that may not make the most sense. So Eli is team not this. Eli is team just make this match a production block, like have elasticities and nestings up here, and then have them go in there. I can certainly do that. I believe that I can certainly do that. I would have to do it in a unified way so that I'm not duplicating a bunch of code, because that's just a recipe for disaster in the future. But I'm curious, I should solicit feedback from the crowd before Eli comes in and says no. Does anybody have strong feelings on this one way or another?
I'll be the first mover, I guess. I don't know if I have strong feelings about it because I'm not the one that has to code it up, but I will say that like the proposed change where you have sort of the substitution framework in the production block, and then the demand block is just kind of the composite of that, is like something that I just do naturally because I've gotten so used to like base like MPSG and GAMS, which you can't have, like you said, like an elasticity across goods. But I've never even tried to do a nesting and a demand block just because like a lot of the code that I use is like based on what Tom did at some point, and he does kind of your proposed change, or he did.
Yeah.
So it makes a lot of sense to me, and
Yeah.
I'm not going to gain a whole ton. Like I already do that anyway. So.
Okay, that's good. I think you can, by the way, in GAMS MPSGE, put any elasticities you want and have them appear in final demands.
Yeah, I think you can.
It's a strong think.
Yeah, I guess I just never really bothered to try because it's just so common to like have some sort of like full consumption production block that feeds into like a single demand input into the representative agent block. So I don't know. I just like it's just what I do naturally without even thinking about it, I guess.
Does Joe have strong feelings?
No, I was basically gonna echo that. I feel like that's what a lot of people have learned on, is doing it the way that your proposed changes. So it would probably be more natural for a large amount of the community that would likely use this versus, kind of what you're already doing now. Plus, I like the fact that you're not gonna have to replicate a bunch of code, because then if one wanted to change things, they're gonna have to go in all these, they're gonna have to do maybe a bit more to make changes.
Yeah, what I would probably do is restructure the demand macro. Okay, I'll say something. Maybe this will be controversial, maybe it won't be. Demands are essentially productions where endowments have elasticity 0, essentially, with some added like tax revenue stuff. But if we went with this way, I would essentially make the demand macro be a copy of the production macro, like in code. Like it would just sort of call the production macro in a way. It'd do the same stuff. Which has pros and cons, but one thing I could also do when you define the consumer. So typically you define commodities before consumers. There's just that order you go sectors, commodities, consumers. When you define the consumer, I could just, no, I don't like that. I'd say I could have an argument where you're like, this is the consumer, this is what it demands. I don't think I like that. I think I like this more. Um,
I mean,
yeah,
if you did try to like, but and just like I have to leave before the fight ensues, so but you know, I will say like if it build it, I'd probably use it like the
yeah.
Field of Dreams kind of thing. But um I I do wonder like if repurposing the production block for endowments, it's like a little different, right? Because it's like
Mhm.
it demands scale with like output in that particular like whereas
Mhm.
endowments are fixed. So anyway, like it's a
Yeah,
little different than the substitutional elasticity being zero, but it's kind of,
yeah. So I think my big problem is that I always think about this from a purely mathematical point of view. I'm sorry, economists. Um, and it's been, I don't know, like 2 years since I checked the algebra, but it is very similar. Hey,
it
but
is.
yeah,
Yeah, it is.
like CES functions on the input and output side are exactly the same. It's just a negative
Right,
elasticity. Yeah.
right.
Um,
Well, yeah, on the output side, it's a CET function.
CES -1.
Yeah, that's fair.
Well, no, the -1 is the cross on the T. That's perfect. It nails it. Um,
Yeah, I think you just figured out life there. Okay, cool.
yeah, before Drew runs away, I should say I'm drafting an email to EPA and ECC about appointment going down. Just want to make the language be, I want to know what I'm going to do before I send it.
Okay, sounds
Yeah,
good. Okay,
I'll do that
thanks,
before I
Mitch.
leave. Yep. All right, Eli's here. Now we get to fight. Hey, Eli. So, I'll just quickly recap for Eli. I'm writing documentation today, which Eli's going to clap and thumbs up. This isn't a branch, it's in previews PR 240. And what we're discussing, so I'm just giving an overview of variables productions, and for demands, I'm discussing potential changes for the future. So Eli, your team make this be more like a production block, and I'm sort of team more make demands be its own thing and offload the production somewhere else. Do you want to go on record and give your
So the question is whether the demand block should be more
more like a production block
yeah.
where so here notice I'm putting the elasticity down there.
Well, okay, I want to go on record and say yes and no. I think that the demand block should have elements, for instance, nesting.
Mhm.
That seems really important, actually, which is in that way it should be like a production block, and in other ways, not necessarily. But that's nesting, and therefore being able to calculate a nested utility and having a built-in utility function. I will go on record 100%, and I'm on GitHub saying we should have that.
So let's say I'm able to do it this way and still retrieve utility.
You need nesting though.
This would have, well, so what the way that this does it is it creates like a shadow, like I don't want to say a shadow price or shadow commodity because that already means something. But it creates like a background commodity. So what I'm doing is instead of having multiple final demands, I just break those out into a production block going into one commodity that's demanded by the consumer.
Yeah, so the thing is, if we have it built into a demand block, you can have an inbuilt utility to demands. You don't have to create one. We do not have a utility calculation block. It seems sort of like
Your volume's going up and your volume is just slowly. That's kind of weird.
You couldn't hear the last bit.
let me check if there's something. I don't know. All right, I'll just keep going. So basically, like to calculate utility, if we have it in a demand block, it's just more what's the word? Like not intuitive, but it makes sense to have our own internal utility calculation, especially once we have nested demands as an option. This is what I do in my own research. but I have to push it to a production block. I have to generate this whole custom utility calculation. It's like actually kind of complicated, but I think we should and can build it into the demand block because that's where we would have utility.
So utility is like an extra function. You'd type like utility RA QX or something, or yeah, QAX or something.
Exactly. And then
So if I'm able to replicate that without putting it in the demand block, would you be more in favor of that?
yeah, I mean, if you feel like it's really important, it's just sort of, it doesn't, unless you're doing this sort of like, this sort of, I mean, again, maybe this isn't the moment, but you're only going to have utility coming from some kind of consumption, like consumption utility, ultimately in this kind of model. And so having it in production is a way of like moving it to a place where you can do it, but it's sort of awkward and it sort of, aligns more with production where we're not really calculating this utility, whereas it's more, obviously it's like link generated demand. And you can do that sort of movement into a production block and have a single consumption utility. But then there's going to be other things later on, I think, that we would probably like to do development wise to change other ways of doing utility. We could have a leisure element in utility, in which case you really want to probably keep it with demand, or again, you're starting to get like more and more complicated sets of production blocks to replicate this.
Yeah, I will. I still have to replicate your utility. That's on me. It's on a to-do list. I've had my focus elsewhere. But I think once I do that, hopefully I can convince you. Because my goal is I want to be able to convince Eli in particular, that I want to be able to, what am I saying?
You don't want to put nesting in demands, and you don't want to like replicate
Yeah.
too much of their production stuff.
Yeah, something like that.
But we disagree, and we will come to blows eventually.
That's it. Before you came in, I said once Eli comes in, this is the page we're going to fight about.
All right, go on then.
It's well documented. Don't worry. Yeah, so this is one of the big proposed changes. I have a couple others. They'll mainly be, I'm going to try not to change the API so that for the end user, there's just no changes. That would be ideal. If it's not possible, I'll document that really well. Whenever there's a release, it's very easy to put like release notes. And those, well, what am I trying to say here? If you click wherever it is, the star or watch, then you can get notifications specifically when there's a release. My plan for this is the new year. Yeah, maybe end of January, February, depending on how other things go. Although other things are going well, I can talk about that a little bit for Joe and Eli and Siwa, because Eli and Siwa know what I'm working on. Joe might not. I should ask Joe, do you go by Joe or do you go by Joseph? I say Joe.
I was going by Joe.
Okay. Your name says Joseph, and I'm like, oh no.
It's just professional settings. I put Joseph, but
Yeah,
Joe's always.
that makes sense. One thing that I really want to break out and really want to make easier to retrieve is the tax revenue. Currently, tax revenue is kind of a pain in the neck to extract, and I think it would be really useful to be able to see that. Because, I mean, you want to know how much tax you're bringing in, right? Given a shot.
Yeah, I'll have it.
Yeah. I mean, it's in the code. I can show you exactly where it
can
lives.
get it, right?
It's annoying. There it is. Tax revenue. It's this thing right here, which has a lot of problems. It's slow. I've had it not work so well. I should talk about this virtual as well.
One thing that might be nice while we're brainstorming or / arguing is because right now you can get the tax revenue by sector, but you cannot just pull all the tax revenue for a consumer.
Yes, I like that.
So that would be nice, especially for me. The tax setup in my model is like quite complicated because it implements at different sectors because I have all the complementarity sectors that So I'm like having to track every single one independently. But yeah, tax revenue from the per consumer would be nice.
That should be pretty easy to do. I don't have any wood. Hold on. Actually, that's not true. I have a ton of wood around me. What am I talking about? Yeah, that should be pretty easy to do. I'm not satisfied with how tax revenue is set up. I gotta make it better. If you're curious where the actual equations are built, it's in build. And then I just keep scrolling until you see the three big ones: zero profit, market clearance, income balance. I think auxiliary is down here too. This is how it actually builds the constraints. Actually, technically it's down here, but it's zero profit complementary to the sector. So I've tried to make it be very much not a mystery in how it does that. I've tried to work to make this be very clear. Other changes that are going to be incoming. I ran out of time, so I'm out of this. Other big changes. This doesn't have a doc string. This doesn't have a doc string. This doesn't have a doc string. They all need doc strings. They need documentation. So I need to go through and document these things and tell you exactly what's going into it, exactly where it's coming from. Have I ever explained this virtual equals false, virtual equals true? I don't think so. Maybe.
Not to the world.
I don't know it. Yeah, I don't know it.
Yeah, the difference, I can show it very nicely. The difference is these two. If you put virtual equals true, it's going to tell you just the variable. If you put virtual equals false, it's the whole cost function. So it can be really, really useful for debugging, because then you can just kind of get the top level cost function. Let me see if I have an example booked up. Oh boy, I do. Okay. Let me close all of my documentation and this. Okay, so I have to hit stop share, and then I have to hit share Windows. Sorry, I'm going to say this again. Sorry, Siwa and Eli. I got a new monitor, and it's huge. Sorry. Oh, let me make this. Okay, come on. Okay, that should be a more reasonable size. But I can't share my whole window, and Teams doesn't allow me to share a subset of a screen. But here we go. Zoom does. Okay, all I'm going to do, go like this. Okay, I can do, there's the cost function for X. So it's CES, elasticity is 2. You can see the taxes. Very nice. I should be able to do virtual equals true. And that is much less useful. I think, hold on. Nope. I want to implement partial as well, because what that would do is it would go down one level. So if you had a highly nested cost function or a highly nested production block that went doo, 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 you could tell it sort of the level that you want it to expand to. So partial would be the first level. So it'd just be a sum of virtual cost functions. I think that'll be really useful for seeing the actual equations. The other thing I want to do, this is a symbol that's auto-generated by jump. I should be able to pretty easily change that to be useful. Pretty easily, meaning that I will need to do a little bit of work to make sure that names don't overlap. But I think if I call it cost function sector nest, it should be okay.
Yeah, use the nest.
Yeah, because nest names have to check this, but I believe nest names are required to be unique. And they should. So you shouldn't be able to have a nest that's called like X here and another nest called X here. That should cause an error.
But you can have the same name for an input nest and an output nest.
I think No, because it will check. So what MPSG does when it builds it, it looks at the nestings. And one of the ways it builds the trees is it assigns the nests to each one. And if a nest gets assigned multiple spots, one an input, one an output, that is definitely an error.
Really?
Let me check. Hold on. Hold on. I can check this. I don't care.
I just can believe you.
Boom, error. The nest S appears in both an input and output.
There you go. Nice.
Okay, good. Please hold on. Gosh darn it. Please check U model. I have found more typos today than I have in a long time. Okay, cool. Other improvements that are incoming. I don't have a highly nested thing right now, but let me define this. Equals A, B. So I'll show off one thing. Let me make I. Okay. Let me look at M basic. Oops, that's basic. This is one thing that is fairly new. Fairly new meaning the last big update. What it would do before is it wouldn't print ZI, it would do ZA and ZB. So instead of one Z, there would be two. Because there's, like, really, if I type Z, there's two sectors called Z. The big efficiency that it did was compacting this down to just be a single sector when it displays like this. For this case, it's not super useful. But imagine if instead of this, I were 1, 2,000. Variable, oh, I did not. Okay, you should be down here. Expect you. So now when I do M basic, it prints exactly the same because the index on Z is irrelevant. But if I just print Z, there's 1,000 of them. And if this printed here, then that's not useful. It just destroys everything else. The one problem at the moment is I also want production sectors to do that. Let me go here. So this is a very nice print of this model, right? I've got my parameter, got my sectors, it's printed really nicely. And all my production blocks look really nice too. The second I get something that's indexed in a production block, it's going to print each one individually. That's going to be a little bit harder problem to solve, but that's one that I really want to do. I think it's really important because then, like the household model or even the WinDC national model, each production block is indexed by like the commodities. So you get 73 production things that are printed. Nobody cares. Just print the one, the representative symbol.
But then the quantities are all different for each indexed.
So that is another problem that I have. That's one of the reasons that I haven't done this yet.
Yeah.
That's going to be a harder one. But if all this is my thought, and I should run this by you guys. My thought is that if the quantities are all different, they came from an array. And that array should have a name that sits right here. Like it should be G of I or something, right? So I should be able to grab and just use like G of I. It's not ideal, but at least it's it's something.
Yeah, it seems, yeah.
Yeah, that's why I haven't done it yet, and that's why it's going to require testing.
And it seems like a complicated thing that should be low priority, but interesting.
So if I get that working, I'll also be able to do this. So this cost function of X, it's not pretty. It would be much easier if there was like summation notation with it, right? Like it's summing over something. I'm gonna have to think about how to do that one too. So basically, what I want to replicate, the reason people want Tom's MPSGE version 2, the GAMS version, is it will automatically write the equations.
Yeah, that's right. We've been dreaming about that for years.
That's what I want this to do.
We
And I
want
think the
particularly
first
sort of
step
like
to that.
the production equations.
Yeah. The big difference being that MPSGE version 2, Tom just makes up all the variable names, essentially. Like nothing comes with it. Joe, do you have a question?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I've been hearing about version 2 for like over half a decade.
Oh, it's longer than that, I'm sure.
Yeah. Is that even going to come out anytime soon? I mean, now that Tom's retired, I thought I had the suspicion that the MPSGE Julia was going to basically be the replacement for it.
Yeah, that's my idea. I have, oh my goodness, there it is.
Yeah, because I mean, a way you could do in Julia is just convert it into like a LaTeX string, but that's also not ideal unless you can get it to print like LaTeX in the console.
You can.
But at the very least, you could have it create like a file where it has the LaTeX or have it pre-built. So then
It's the indexing that, like, so we did this in the early versions, and you can print it nicely, but like as soon as you get indexing, then you just get all the equations. And the dream is to have something that interprets the fact that it's indexed and writes an indexed equation somehow. That step is just like, that's all the.
Have you ever seen the code for MPSGE version 2?
a long time ago, like
Here's some of it, yeah. This could very well be the exact same model that I was just showing off. Because it's just the simplest one. So he does this. This is all the stuff that he has to auto-generate so that it actually does it correctly. And I don't think he's gotten around to doing that yet.
Well, he's retired now, so.
Well, he's retired from the university. He is very much still working.
Oh, what is he working on?
I don't know. I missed. So there was a Christmas party for our department last Wednesday, but that was the day that I got the state data balanced. So I got distracted with that and forgot about it. But he's working with people in China and Japan, and
Yeah,
of course.
Yeah, one of my colleagues at Stanford has some sort of project she's on in China that he's working somewhat on.
Oops. I almost hit stop. I almost hit leave instead of stop sharing. I'm sorry. So one last thing. I'll show this off for at least Joe. Yeah.
But on Tom, he's also definitely not working on a lot of things. So, and in the same conversation I had with Chen Fei, I was only one of, as I told Mitch, one of 3 people who have papers with Tom who he's not responding to that she knows about.
All right. Yeah, it's a good half of my job used to be just getting Tom to reply to things. So going down to 50% time, I'm essentially just going back down to what I used to do in a way. More because I used to be 80% times for what I have. So math is too hard. So I have 3 things. WinDC National. This one is very good. You could clone this right now. It's available as a Julia package. You can just hit add WinDC National, and it will build the WinDC National data. WinDC Regional, same, not quite the same thing. This one is still pretty early. I think it's a little buggy still. Before going to make this be super stable and super good, I'm working on the household disaggregation. But this is a package. I have to add a README. There is documentation. The documentation is actually decent because it tells you how it disaggregates. So create state table, and it tells you exactly what it's doing at each step and the math behind it. Almost. This one is still pretty rough. I got to make that better. This might have bugs in it. It might not work properly, but it runs on my machine, and that's all that matters. It runs on my machine. That's all that matters for the household disaggregation. This one is currently private because it is nowhere near complete. Apparently, I did not push my commits yesterday. It's great. I'm very close to having this done. Very, very close. Today's Thursday. Next week, end of the year, I'm going to have this done for sure. because then we'll have the full household disaggregation. After that, probably GTAP WinDC. I would like to just have so here, there's a command called build US table. I would like to just have that work. You could put GTAP in it or just automatically disaggregate and aggregate to GTAP and continue that to the state level. Little more work that needs to be done there, but it's not the heaviest lift in the world, which is super nice. I also have to write a bunch of examples for this, stuff like that. But yeah, these work, they run. I'm not sure. No, it runs great, actually. And it's well documented. If I look at the regional and I look at the documentation, one thing that I'm particularly proud of is the model, the doc string for the model here, for the regional model, because in particular, all of these, like I have the data being in a function. If you're like, what goes into this sector, you can see where each one goes. It tells you exactly where it comes from and how to get it. I find this is stupidly useful, pardon the language, because the data doesn't balance and you're just slamming your face against the wall. And this, you can just extract it and look at it. So yeah, that's what I've been working on. That's what I've been doing.
That's a lot, man.
Yeah, it took a long time to build the structure to be able to do this. But now that I have it, it's going surprisingly well, which is disturbing. Things don't usually go well. Working though. One of the silver linings. So what I'm going to do, I can Eli and C1 know this for Joe. What I'm going to do, I'm going to reduce my time down at WinDC, and I'll probably pick up some teaching, which I should be able to do. But if I go more teaching brained, teaching and documentation kind of go hand in hand. So I'll be like, math, 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 math. Oh, I need a break. MPSG, 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 MPSG. Yeah, which is good because this stuff needs documentation and examples and use cases, which I'm working on.
What's going on right here, Mitch? The thing you have highlighted.
Oh, what's that function?
Yeah, you're piping the whole production block.
Oh, yeah. So this is kind of what I'm landing on for how I'll look at this one so I don't have to scroll. This is kind of what I'm thinking about for how I want MPSGE production blocks, like how I think they look nice. So what I do, the output of this, it can either be a data frame or a default dictionary. I'm not crazy about that. That's a hack at the moment. These things are sparse. The data frames are sparse. The point of giving it a default dictionary is that that's still sparse. And if I give it a value that's not in the dictionary, defaults to 0. But what I do is I take that output and I pipe it with the letter Q into MPSGE. I always try to put net port. Oh, I think that's right, yeah. Import, export. So what I try to do is I try to pipe it into here. I try to be very explicit about what parameters are where. And this is just coming straight from the parameter column of a table. So that just on a look, you can be like, okay, that's what all this stuff is coming from. Oh, I don't know what absorption is. Like, where does that? So I can click the documentation. That's what goes in. There's absorption. Yes, I know that I'm sharing my screen. You don't need to tell me. And then absorption also tells you how it's constructed. So absorption is just the sum of across the top without exports. That's the goal. But I think this looks a lot cleaner than putting, where would it be, like this on top of it. Because when I look at a model, I want to see the model. And if I do that, I'm going to click a lot here. I'm sorry. Click. 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 If I scroll, there's the doc string that we're just looking at. Even in the code, it's pretty easy if I go back to 100%. to sort of get an idea. This is probably too small for you. I apologize. To get an idea of what is going on. That's my game plan. I'm not crazy about using the default dictionary. I'd like a better way to do that. Once people get to use this more, I'm sure they'll have ideas and they will tell me and it'll be great and I will implement them and everybody will be happy. But for now, only I am happy. Wait, no, that's not right. That's not what I want.
Wait.
All right, it's noon or 1 or sometime I
One.
can't figure out on the West Coast. Any other questions, comments, concerns?
No,
This
this
is
is great.
great.
Look,
And if you ever experience issues with MPSG, this goes for everybody. You can raise an issue. Send me an email. It's fine. How things get
Fine.
better.
Yeah, it's been a productive year, Mitch. You should be proud. It's really you've pushed it along.
Yeah.
I don't think anyone else could have done this.
Yeah. It's funny because in hindsight, you always look back and be like, man, I didn't do anything.
You did a lot, man.
Thank you. That's nice to hear because it's been a lot of work. It's been a rough year.
On many levels, it's been a rough year.
Yeah. Siwa, I think you are more than having a rough year. Joe, EPA, yeah.
We're
Hopefully it
pushing
gets
forward.
better.
Yeah, that's what I'm hoping for.
yeah. Yes, we've been busy. We've had a lot. Keep getting more and more things that we need to work on. So
Oh, yeah.
it's
I'll hit stop recording.